Hello everybody, Leah Harlann here. I know I kind of glossed over / ignored it in my last video, but here we are about a week into the second month of 2024, and I haven't given you any sort of reading updates for a while. I didn't really do any rapid fire reviews or relatively flowery reflections for the last 3 months of the year, and I've only just finished up the last book that I read most of in January, and I didn't give you any kind of 2023 overview. So we're going to try to treat this video as one big catch-up video. We're going to try to catch up on talking about everything that I read for the rest of 2023, so like quarter 4, and then I'll kind of give you a little bit of an overview of 2023 as a whole. Definitely going to talk about some of my best reads, but I didn't really have that many disappointments, so I may not bother doing that kind of negative portion of this video. Okay, let's start with the major shopkeeping portion, which is going over everything I read in the last quarter of 2023. So that is October, November, December. I'll also cover a couple other extra like DNFs that fell somewhere in there, but it was just kind of a lot was going on, so I do apologize for not giving any updates until now. The October was incredibly busy. Gosh, that feels like forever ago. So I only read 4 things in October, and 2 of them were graphic novels and 1 was a novella. So in October, the only full-size novel that I finished was 1,000 Autumns, Chanchu by Mengshi Shi. I'm so sorry if I pronounced that wrong. And that was a wuxia danmei, definitely marketed and grabbed by 7 Seas and published alongside the likes of Modao Zushi and Tiangguan Sifu by Mosheng Tongshu. So I wanted to try this one because I hadn't already read this author's works before, unlike with a lot of the other danmei that I typically talk about and show off on my channels, because I had already read them before they got traditionally published in English. But so I wanted to try this one, try something new, and honestly, I was just really bored by it. Nothing about this first volume hooked me. I didn't really care for either of the main characters. One of them was like mildly interesting, but he just didn't really do enough to make me want to read more, so I don't think I'm going to continue with 1,000 Autumns, but I'm looking forward to trying other danmeis, especially here in 2024. The novella that I read in October was Thornhedge by T. Kingfisher. This has definitely cemented T. Kingfisher as an author that I definitely want to go and read more of her backlist, because after Nettle and Bone and then Thornhedge, I just have really come to love Kingfisher's like kind of dark fantasy works. I'm not going to be checking out What Moves the Dead and some of the more horror-esque works in Kingfisher's list, because I don't really do horror very well, and especially like a lot of body horror and fungal horror type stuff, which those of you may know if you've read that work is pretty much kind of like the big main thing in that one. So, but I am looking forward to trying some of the other works, like Paladin's Grace and like some of the other stuff by Kingfisher. And then the 2 graphic novels that I read in October were A Quick and Easy Guide to Asexuality by Molly Muldoon and Will Hernandez, and then a graphic novel adaptation of a middle grade novel called Arusha and the End of Time by Roshani Chokshi. And so Quick and Easy Guide to Asexuality was just kind of an interesting one. I like picking up materials related to explaining asexuality because as an asexual identifying person myself, I'm always looking for good materials to refer other people to when they either have a hard time understanding my explanation or just want to learn more or get some other info and perspectives. One of the difficult things about asexuality and the greater umbrella is that the experience of being and identifying as asexual is a lot more varied and unique from person to person using that label, as opposed to a lot of other members of the queer community and the other letters of LGBTQIA+. So it can be hard to explain, and it can be hard to understand, both for allosexuals, which are people who do experience sexual attraction, but also even for other questioning members of the queer community who may feel like they fall under the ace or aro umbrella, but aren't really sure where under the umbrella they fall. So I found this graphic novel pretty beginner friendly, but it didn't really go much farther beyond the basics. So if you're looking for more nuanced explanations or kind of a deeper dive into asexuality, I don't think this one would be a good reference. But if you are trying to get materials to give to people who are like brand new to the idea, they have never heard the word asexuality before today, or they're just really having a hard time understanding some of the basic fundamentals of what it means to be asexual, then I think this is a good one. It's a good graphic novel. It's very conversational as well, so I think it's very easily digestible and a quick read. And then for Arusha and the End of Time, this is a middle grade series, and I actually have the first volume of the first book, but I haven't touched it, and so I thought, well, I'll try the graphic novel. It'll be faster, and I'll be able to get a good sense for whether or not I think I'll want to continue the series or go and read the book. And I think that the graphic novel adaptation, it feels like it cut too much out, or it feels like it kind of glossed over too much. So I don't think I can give a fair assessment of Arusha as like a series or anything. But yeah, I didn't really enjoy the graphic novels, so I definitely won't continue with those. And yeah, I'm just not sure if I'm going to go back and read the novel anytime soon. I think it's a really interesting premise, feels very like Percy Jackson, but with Indian mythology. So it could be a great recommendation if you're looking for something in that area. But I kind of haven't been, at least not at the middle grade or like YA level. And so, yeah, that was November. I was really busy, October. I was really busy back in October. I also did some really cool social stuff. I went and saw Baby Metal live in concert, along with Metalocalypse, or whatever that band is called. And then I also went to Japan back at the end of October. And hopefully I'm going to do a sort of 2023 vlog in a separate video where I'll show you some footage from that trip, because it was absolutely stellar. Haven't been in like 5 years, so it was just really great to get to go, and especially in a different season. I'd never been to Japan in the fall before. So moving on to November, I'd love to tell you one of my favorite reads from the month of November, but it is part of the St. Martin's Press family. And I am supporting the boycott whenever possible. So I'm not going to tell you about that book, unfortunately. And I can't even talk about its sequel that's going to be coming out this year that I was also planning to check out. So very unfortunate. So let's talk about one of my very rare DNFs from 2023, which was Gilded by Marissa Meyer. Now, I love Marissa Meyer, don't get me wrong. I massively enjoyed her like sci-fi fairy tale retelling series that starts with Cinder and had Scarlet and Cress, and then the last one's not called Snow. I don't remember. But that series was very fundamental to my development and my tastes in reading. And so I wanted to check out Gilded but I just couldn't really get into it. I think it was a little too slow to get started. I didn't really connect with or care about the protagonist. And I actually read a little bit of looking ahead and looking at kind of some of the elements that were going to be in the sequel. And it just sounded like they were very much not going to be my cup of tea. So I felt comfortable DNFing Gilded. Really unfortunate, but I still have hope for Marissa Meyer. I'll definitely check out some of her other stuff. I want to check out Renegades, her sci-fi. I think it's sci-fi. Next in November, this was the book that I read for the Adventure in Aldea challenge, and it was The City We Became by N.K. Jemisin. And this one, I was a little worried because I'd had it on my shelf for years, and I'd seen kind of polarizing reviews or ratings from different people. But for me, it was a 5-star. Absolute 5-star. I ravaged that book. It was so great to consume. Over the Thanksgiving break, I went on a trip. I was visiting family, so it was great to read on the plane each way, and I just had an excellent time. I wrote a review on Goodreads, which you can read back in full. I just realized once again that I haven't really been explaining the premise of any of these books that I've been talking about, so fuck it. I'm not going to backtrack, but I'll give you The City We Became 1 second. Okay, so The City We Became is the first in a duology, and it's actually based on a short story that Jemisin wrote sometime before that then got used as sort of the seed that was planted and grew into this full-sized novel. And it takes this sort of... It's just so hard to explain or to put it into any particular genre. It's science fiction. It's got a little bit of urban fantasy. It's definitely adult. It's got some queer. And... okay, I'll just kind of dive in with explaining that all major cities around the world have these sort of souls, and when the city grows to a certain point, that soul needs to be born. And when the time comes for a city to be born, it chooses an avatar, a person who lives in the city as their avatar. And then it goes through this process, and the avatar has to guide or kind of help the city give birth to its soul. But every time a city is trying to be born, this sort of antagonist evil force tries to interfere and prevent the city from being born. So this story takes place in the city of New York, which is trying to give birth and has its avatar. And something kind of happens during the process where it doesn't necessarily fail or go wrong in a sense, but it just goes in a very unusual way that's unprecedented. And as a result, there is the soul kind of gets the avatar kind of gets split into 5 people who are representing all of the different boroughs of New York City. So you've got the Bronx, you've got Brooklyn, you've got Manhattan, things like that. And all of these different characters have a POV in this book, and I just liked all of them. I really liked every single character. I also get why people don't like this book, why it's not their cup of tea. But for me, who's not even that big of a sci-fi girly, even the sci-fi elements were kind of working for me. Although they are pretty hand-wavy and abstract. It's more descriptive, more almost purple prosy when it comes to the sci-fi. So if that's not for you, if you need more hard sci-fi, this is not going to be for you. But if you like Jemisin's world building and you want to see her basically write a love letter to the city of New York, I feel like you should definitely check this one out. I actually have no personal connection to New York. I'm not from there. I've only been there once for a couple times for short trips. And I still loved it. I fell in love with all the descriptions and the people and everything Jemisin says about New York City. So yeah, 5 stars for me. I still haven't gotten around to the second book, The City Born Great, but I have heard that it's kind of disappointing compared to the first one because this was originally supposed to be a trilogy, then it got shortened to a duology. So Jemison kind of has to put everything that would have been in 2 books down into 1, and it apparently does show a little bit. That was kind of the big one for November. What else? One other thing I read in November was an arc of a novella, which I did mention in my 30 upcoming books in 2024 that I was looking forward to, and that's An Imposition of Unnecessary Obstacles by Malka Older. It's a science fiction novella. I kind of have taken to calling these cozy science fiction. It's the sequel to The Mimicking of Known Successes. I talk about it a little more in the other video, which you should go ahead and watch. But it was a good quick read. Definitely great having something cozy to read in the wintertime. And I'm looking forward to continuing the series. And I hope, and as soon as the third one gets listed on NetGalley, you will for sure see me, hear from me requesting a copy. Another book I read in November that I was pleasantly surprised by was Song of Silver, Flame Like Night by Amelie Wen Zhao. This was an Illumicrate book from earlier in 2023, which I did briefly try out in my Illumicrate kind of taste testing video. And I liked it, so I moved it higher in priority on my TBR, and I ended up reading that one and enjoying it quite a lot. It was a little bit slow at times, so it did take me a couple weeks to get through it while juggling some other stuff. But ultimately, I really liked the sort of wuxia fantasy elements. I thought it was an interesting take on that colonizer fantasy that takes place in Asian settings that we've seen a few different stories come out in recent years. I feel like some of them are trying to capitalize on or emulate the success of the Poppy War trilogy, but this one very much just has a very different vibe, even though when you initially check out the premise, it may seem like it's going to try to be like the Poppy War trilogy. And so I also described this one in my 30 books in 2024 video because its sequel actually already came out and I just haven't gotten around to reading it yet. But briefly, it's about a girl named Lan who lives in a sort of fantasy parallel China that was conquered by Atlanteans, and there are magic systems that involve utilizing the different elements. And while Lan and her people in the past had practitioners that could utilize lots of different magical elements, the Atlanteans always use only metal-based magic. And so they've been conquered for a long time. She meets a boy, she has a mysterious mark, potentially hidden powers. He tries to help train her while taking her to a sort of hidden school where she can hide from their enemies. And, they want to try and perhaps tap into another source of power from their land to fight off these colonizers. And the first book ended in a very interesting way. So I hope to get around to the second book pretty soon. But who knows? I've got some other upcoming releases that I haven't missed yet that I need to read and review to keep my NetGalley score high. The other Illumicrate book that I read in November actually was God Killer by Hannah Kaner. That one was also from early on in 2023, and I also covered in my taste test video, and also has a sequel coming out in the near future called Sunbringer, if I'm not mistaken. So, maybe it's a trend, but basically after I finished filming that Illumicrate video, I pretty much dove right into those two since I had moved them into high priority on my TBR, and I'm delighted to say that they proved entertaining all the way through. I think I gave both of them 4 stars. God Killer, I think I assumed it was going to be a standalone, and then I was wrong, but I also wasn't mad about that. It's got a little more of like the found family fantasy story, and features a really interesting setting when it comes to gods and how basically if people like have a firm enough belief in something or offer devotion in some way strongly and often enough, gods can sort of spring into existence. And it's got a really, but of course, not all of gods are good. And so our main character is a god killer and makes a lot of money doing that because the kingdom they all live in had a massive war with gods and ultimately killed or expelled all of them from the kingdom within the last few years. And I don't really want to say much more than that because it's spoilers or, I don't want to give too much away, but it was really good. I'm excited about the sequel, and yeah. Last couple things that I read in November were a couple of novellas. One is Every Heart a Doorway by Shelley Maguire. And that is a pretty big series I might be committing to because I did enjoy it. But yeah, I also don't feel any particular rush to get to it. So you might just kind of hear about an update, one more entry in the Wayward Children series being completed. Again, no particular rush to catch up or anything like that. But for those of you who don't know, I don't know how you say it. Every Heart a Doorway is the first novella in the Wayward Children series, and it's about children who have kind of been teleported or visited other worlds, other dimensions, and then returned to this, normal plane, except, their journeys, no matter how long or short they were, kind of stuck with them, and, kids can't really go back to being normal after that, and a lot of these kids actually want to go back to the worlds that they visited, no matter how good or bad of a fit they were. Although all of them seem to feel like that was where they truly belonged, and because they can't just be normal, their parents send them off to this home. And the home is actually run by an elderly woman who had the same experience as them when she was younger, and she also misses her world. And so it's kind of like a foster's home for imaginary friends type of house, but for kids. It's called Eleanor West's Home for Wayward Children. And it seems like the general style of these novellas, if I understand it correctly, is sometimes they're a little more overarching and sometimes they focus in on specific children who come and go from the house. So the first one was kind of a mix of both. It very much centered on this girl who was like a newcomer to the house and meeting all these other characters who have been there for varying amounts of times. And of course, Eleanor, who runs the home. But then there was a mystery, a plot of sorts that was also driving things along. So I enjoyed it. It was a pretty quick read. Like I said, I'm going to probably keep up with the series, but also not in any particular hurry. And then the other novella that I read in November was called Binti by Nnedi Okorafor. And this is a science fiction novel that I read just as like a casual recommendation over Thanksgiving from a friend. They happened to have it with them, and so they're like, here, it's really short, so I was able to read it in a day and then give it back to them. And Binti, I don't know if this is one of the ones that gets recommended when people ask, like, where do I start with Okorafor's works? But I liked what I got. It feels like a nice taste of their works, and so I do plan to eventually check out some other works. Though I think there are a couple more entries after Binti that are like a series. Although that one kind of felt like it could stand alone. So Binti is a character of the same of that name, who leaves her planet and is the first person from her culture to ever be accepted to this university that's like out in space. It's one of the best in the galaxy or something. But then when she's on the ship traveling there, this very violent attack happens, and she kind of like through a mixture of I don't want to say anymore, but an incident happens. There's a sort of enemy alien race that attacks the ship, And then things kind of develop from there in a very unique way because of who Binti is and her culture and the skills that she has that are unique to her people and is part of why she was accepted to the university in the first place. So yeah, I enjoyed it. It has like a 3.87 on Goodreads, but I think I would have rated it like 4 stars. Don't really know what else to say about it. Like I said, might go ahead and read some other books by Nnedi Okorafor later, but yeah. And then December had a couple different things, but December is also where things started getting really, really busy for me, and that kind of continued into the new year, and that's why I haven't been able to read that much so far. But I'll just go ahead and throw it out there, get the bad energy out first. I DNF'd Fourth Wing in December. I tried it. I had heard everything about Fourth Wing by this point. I already knew the story. I had heard good reviews, bad reviews, like funny roasts and absolute teardowns, and the people who loved every bit of it. I had some real like IRL friends who loved it. And then, I also heard the opinions of the people who were like, hey, just turn your brain off and read it. It's good fun. I DNF'd it at like a solid 26%. It just did not do it for me. And I was not interested in reading any further. It was just, I could not, you could say maybe I could not turn my brain off enough for this book. But yeah, will not try to go back again. Won't read any of the other ones. I'll just enjoy all of the other book talk and booktube content regarding this particular series. So the first one that I completed in December was Fireborn by Rosaria Munda. And some of you might have heard that this is a trilogy that gets recommended to people, I think regardless of whether or not you like Fourth Wing. But it has, probably because it has a very similar premise. It's like a kind of military academy type setting. There are students that are dragon riders. In fact, these kids already have their dragons at the beginning, which Fourth Wing did not and took its sweet time getting to. So that was awesome. It's also just a lot more nuanced in its characters and the war that's going on, sort of. Well, like did go on. It's I'll just tell you, it's about the whole story takes place mainly with 2 POVs. We've got a girl named Annie and a boy named Lee. They were both really young children when there was a coup or like a revolution that overthrew the regime of basically these 3 really powerful families of dragon riders who had been ruling as like a triad for generations, and it had become like really corrupt, and so a revolution overthrew all of them, and they put in a totally new style of government. And before, it was only like nobility who could become dragon riders, but now, they have this academy, and they decided for the first time to reopen the dragon riding portion, and this time open it to anybody. So pretty much any kid in this empire could show up in front of a dragon, walk down a line of all of these dragon hatchlings, and see if they bonded with one of them. And if they did, they got to join the school. So Annie and Lee are both kids who came from very different backgrounds. And Lee is former nobility who is in hiding, and Annie is a commoner. And both of them end up in the dragon school. And it's just a lot happens from there. They're basically like right on the cusp of joining the like fully fledged dragon riding ranks as like this new division of the fleet, since again it's the first time in years that dragon riders are even being trained. And it's got a lot of the fun, like it's got a lot of politicking, which I love. The different POVs are great for giving you a lot of context and world building for this story, but from, like I said, the different perspectives of like the commoner and the former nobility. And I enjoyed it a lot. and I can't wait to eventually get around to reading the rest of it. It is a trilogy, like I said, and I do just keep hearing it recommended, like in the same breath as like, what do I read after Fourth Wing? Whether people seemed to hate or love Fourth Wing. So I'm glad to say that I loved this one, even though I didn't love Fourth Wing. I also read a graphic novel called Princess Ever After. This one's by Kay O'Neill. I've read plenty of other Kay O'Neill graphic novels, which I've talked about in other videos. So this was just another one that when I saw it available from one of my libraries as an ebook, I went ahead and grabbed it and read it in a day. It was just really cute. Little bit, just I don't know. It's Kay O'Neill. If you like anything by Kay O'Neill, you'll probably like everything else by them. So highly recommend it. And then The Hanged Man was another book that I read in December by Katie Edwards. This is the sequel to The Last Son. And that is a The Tarot Sequence is the name of the series. So that's book 2 in the Tarot Sequence. If you're not familiar with the Tarot Sequence, it follows a man named Rune St. John and his bonded bodyguard. It's an urban fantasy where a lot of the kind of governing body of this island called New Atlantis features characters themed around the tarot cards, except in universe, they say that the people came first and the cards came second. And it is an urban fantasy, but apparently, in the distant past, they all used to be hidden, and then they were forced to step out into the world when the world got too advanced with its technology and everything. There was a war between these magic mythical people and the normal people until eventually they settled on this new island of New Atlantis. And Rune St. John has like a very dark past as the sole heir to the Sun Throne. And but it's a great series. I've talked about it before. I read the first book, I think all the way back in 2022. So it took me a long time, but I did eventually get back and read The Hanged Man, which was book 2. And I can't believe I put this off for so long. I was a fool. It was so good. And, it features adult characters, very adult themes, like definitely check trigger warnings. There are definitely tons of elements and mentions of like sexual assault happening, like that's happened off screen in the past. There's torture, I think. There's a lot of PTSD and traumatic deaths that are happening. I think on page in some cases. There's a lot of sometimes graphic violence. There's elements of drug use and just, yeah, it's got a lot going on. And I read this a couple months ago at this point, so I'm having trouble remembering all the necessary trigger warnings. But it was honestly, I feel like I read it even faster than the first one. And then I was so jazzed up after reading that one that I just barreled right into book 3 during January. But I'll talk about that one. I can talk about that in another video. This one's a 2023 video. Is that? Did you guys hear that? Was that? Maybe not. My cat Cinder's been a lot more vocal recently. All the traveling I did in January made her very clingy. Okay, and then the last book that I read in 2023 was an arc, actually, called To Gaze Upon Wicked Gods by Molly X. Chang. Some of you may recognize this title as one of the ones that was affected by the Kate Corain scandal that happened back in December. And I had actually already been approved for an arc of this book before all of that happened. But once that did happen, I decided to go ahead and try to squeeze it in before the end of the year. I have a lot of thoughts and complicated feelings about this book, but ultimately it was a disappointment. which just makes me so sad. Like, I wanted this book to be good so badly. I think I'm going to do an entirely separate video closer to the release of the book where I'll kind of do a deeper dive into my thoughts. But yeah, just, I mean, I wouldn't say I went out of 2023 on a low note, but it was just not great. Um, I was also reading a book for class called Atlas of AI by Kate Crawford, which I find really fascinating and it's got a lot of great information. But it was hard to keep up with it during the class. I fell behind and I never ended up finishing it, but I do intend to eventually come back and finish it. So I've kind of got it marked as on hold. And that covers all of the books that I read in the last quarter of 2023. So let me just try to get some basic information of like an overview of my year, and I'll be right back. All right, so I went ahead and checked my own personal spreadsheet and also pulled up some statistics from Goodreads. And I did pull some stuff from Storygraph, but unfortunately, it looks like my Storygraph is not as complete as my Goodreads, so may have to go back and fill in some gaps there eventually, but I still tried to get some interesting data out of it when I could. All right, so starting with my own personal spreadsheet, I have 91 entries on my spreadsheet from 2023. Now, 6 of those are DNFs or the one book that's on hold, so that leaves me with 85 finished books, and this does match the total number from my Goodreads. Now, of those 85, 45 of them were graphic novels, which does kind of make it seem like I padded out my reading for the year quite a bit. I definitely read a lot of those graphic novels because of the class that I took at the beginning in spring of 2023. So I'm going to try to do some more, personally motivated reading or reading challenge motivated stuff instead. I did read 31 novels, which is pretty great because, like, most of those weren't motivated by any particular classes. I also read 13 novellas, which is pretty great because I didn't really read novellas prior to this year, other than a couple of odd ones from the year before. I also read one anthology and one light novel. The anthology was an interesting experience, but I don't know if I'm going to seek out more of them for any particular reason. The light novel was, of course, the one May that I read, and I kind of hope I get around to reading some more light novels this year. Whether there'll be digital or physical, I'm not sure yet. But speaking of format, most of the books I read this year, 52 of them to be exact, were ebooks, which is pretty exciting. That means like a whole lot of them ended up coming out of my library. Only a couple of them were digital arcs. So this is pretty good. I'm really glad to see statistically that I am utilizing my local library quite often. I did read 33 physical books, which some of them are from libraries as well, but this was also reflected in my attempt to read some of my own books because I was getting a lot of them throughout the year consistently through book subscription boxes, but also a couple of sporadic buying sprees. I also read, I distinguished it separately, but there were 2 books that I read as a combination of physical and audiobook. And then there were 2 audiobooks that I listened to. I think I've said it across many different videos, but I'm not really much of an audiobook girly. It's really hard for me to focus on audiobooks. I do have a sort of audio processing disorder that comes along with my ADHD. So I get distracted easily. And if I'm trying to do like anything else that requires even a modicum of brain power or focus, I'm just no longer interpreting what's being said in my audiobook. And out of those books, 16 of them were from my own personal collection, like I owned them. I'm a little sad to see how low that number is. So, one of my big goals in 2024 is to read a lot more books that I already own and to also reduce the amount of books that I'm buying. or at least pace myself based on how many books I'm reading that I already own before buying new ones. There will be probably exceptions to this in categories like manga, manhwa, light novels, things like that. And I don't think I will prevent myself from buying new books if they are books that I've already read. So, yeah, we'll see how well that goes. I am trying to make it a priority that whenever I have prompts to fulfill for reading challenges, that I pick from my own shelves first, though. And then moving on to other websites, we'll look at my Goodreads, Goodyear, my Goodreads stats for 2023. My goal that I had set was 100 books, and so I only ended up reading 85, like I said, but it was still 21,995 pages read, and it was still, I think, better than my 2022, so I still consider it a win. The shortest book I read was one of my graphic novels. It was Batman the Killing Joke, a very dark one. Not sure if I can recommend that to anybody. And surprisingly, the longest book I read was from the beginning of the year, and that was Empire of Gold by S.A. Chakraborty at 766 pages. I read that as an ebook, so that's kind of I can't believe I read such a long ebook. The average length of books I read in 2023 is 258 pages. This is kind of hard to look at objectively because obviously with like half or to more than half of my reading list from last year being graphic novels, that would heavily skew the page count downwards. The book that was the most shelved that I read with over 1 million people who also shelved it was Yellowface by R.F. Kuang. Fantastic read, had a great time with it. The least shelved book was one of the graphic novels that I read for class, which is Alte Zachen. Kind of cute, slightly off-putting graphic novel about a boy and his grandmother living in, I think, New York City. My average rating for 2023 was 4.2 stars. This doesn't really surprise me because I am a very generous rater when it comes to star rating. I'm not very technical in my ratings unless I dislike a book. And so usually if the vibes were good enough, I will give it between 4 and 5 stars. The highest book I rated on Goodreads, surprisingly, was The Hanged Man. Not the highest book I rated, but the book out of my read list that is the highest rated on Goodreads is The Hanged Man by Katie Edwards. This has a 4.54 average, and I think that really should have been a sign that I should have gotten to it sooner. It was just like how I think it's an even higher rating than the first book. So it's very rare that you see books where the sequels have, well, maybe it's not that rare on Goodreads because usually the people who are reading the sequels loved the first book a lot too. I'm not sure. I don't know the Goodreads culture well enough, I think, even after all this time. My first review of the year was Magic Has No Borders, which was the one anthology that I read. It was a digital arc that I got from NetGalley and HarperCollins, and I rated it 4 stars. I did talk about it in a previous video. It was really interesting though, and it did kind of spark an interest in possibly checking out other fantasy anthologies in the future. I think it really just depends on what kind of theme they have. And then we've got like a really long visual collage of books that I read throughout the year. Obviously, a lot of them are graphic novels, so quite colorful and interesting covers scrolling by. And then my last review of the year was To Gaze Upon Wicked Gods by Molly X. Chang, which I won't go into. Now, Storygraph, if those of you don't know, or if you don't use Storygraph has some other data that is really interesting that they like to pull and organize. This one is going to be slightly incomplete. It says I only read 75 books, so it's missing 10 entries, and I'm not sure which ones, but we can still kind of look at some of the overall data and learn some interesting things about what I like to read. So, moods. One thing is that books can get tagged with moods on Storygraph, and it seems like I mostly enjoy adventurous books. It seems like 47 entries from Storygraph were tagged as adventurous. Slightly behind it is emotional. I do love books that make me feel things. If they make me cry, that's a 5 star right there, unless it's angry crying. Next, kind of evenly tied are these next few values: reflective, hopeful, mysterious, lighthearted. That one's kind of an outlier, but I think that one did show up in a lot of my graphic novels because I really enjoy graphic novels like that. Down at the very bottom is there was one book I read tagged sad, which is kind of funny because like I feel like I watch a lot of sad anime and things like that. Like I love watching sad anime that makes me cry. Maybe I just don't connect as well when it's a book or if there's not enough visual medium happening here. This is perhaps not too surprising, and I'm not sure if this is taking some kind of average, but or how it determines the pace. But I read only 2 books that were tagged as slow paced, and then 40% that were fast paced, and then about 60% of my reads were medium paced. That's so average. Should I be surprised? For page counts, again, not including the 10 outliers or absent entries, I'm not really sure where they are, but I read, of course, 50 books that were less than 300 pages. That's what happens when you read a lot of graphic novels. And then novellas, too, to add on to boot. Only 3 books that I read, according to Storygraph, were over 500 pages, which leaves the rest in that 3 to 500 page range. I don't really know if this affects my goals going into next year. I think I'm trying to disregard the size or length of a book when deciding whether or not to read it, unless I'm just like having a really hard time focusing on stuff, in which case I was picking up a lot of quicker, smaller reads last year whenever my brain kind of felt fried from things like classes or work and travel, things like that. So maybe this was less indicative of reading preference and more just like where my mental headspace was throughout the year. I did find that I kept putting down bigger, chunkier reads to stick to things that I could either read more easily or were just shorter so I could feel accomplished for having completed them. And then, obviously, no surprise, I have a majority fiction with only a handful of nonfiction titles. And I guarantee you a decent amount of those are probably some graphic novels that I was reading for classes. There's really only a couple that I was reading of my own volition. Though I am hoping to read more nonfiction this year as well. For a genre breakdown, the overwhelming lead goes to fantasy, unsurprising. I'm not sure how I feel about LGBTQIA plus being its own genre on Storygraph, though I do like to track when I'm reading either from queer authors or with queer characters. So LGBT coming in second place is encouraging. I'm glad I've been diversifying my reading well enough. Of course, a large amount are classified as graphic novels, even though graphic novels, young adult, and middle grades are less genre, like subject genres, and more age demographics or mediums. So it's kind of interesting. But both encouraging numbers to see that I'm reading more young adult and middle grade as well, even if a lot of those were, again, graphic novels, especially for middle grade. I read a few historical, science fiction. I think the memoirs were all graphic novels, and which I did enjoy actually. I don't normally read memoirs, so the fact that I read any is good, and I wouldn't be opposed to reading more memoirs that come in the graphic novel format. So if you have any recommendations, let me know. Read a few manga, although this is like, I don't use websites like Goodreads and Storygraph to track my manga. I actually use my personal spreadsheet because manga is typically I'm reading ongoing manga, or like if I'm reading volumes of manga in physical or digital format, I don't usually track by like the volumes that I'm completing. I'm kind of just considering it as like ongoing. Like I'm keeping up with it. I'm either like binge reading it, I'm keeping up with it, I'm caught up with it, or I've like finished it or I dropped it, things like that. So I have a separate tab on my spreadsheet for manga, and I can cover some of that along with all the webtoons I've been reading in a separate video. Comics are also on here as a genre, even though again it's more of a format. Everything else is kind of negligible entries. So let's look at some authors. Yeah, most read authors. Kay O'Neill, not surprising because Kay O'Neill has a bunch of graphic novels. Niveau, also unsurprising because I read all 4 Singing Hills Cycles novellas last year of what was out at the time. And then S.A. Chakraborty. This one was, I know it says 3, so some of you might be thinking I read the entire Devabad trilogy, but no, this was actually just the last book in the trilogy, then the like novella, like the short story collection, and then her new book, which was The Adventures of Amina Al-Sarafi. And then, yeah, all of these other authors on here, this is really just a good roundup of authors that I really like. Even if some of them, it's only 2 entries that make them my most read. So I'm okay with this though. I am trying to read more diversely, and I've been enjoying exploring and trying out new authors. So you probably won't see that often that I'm, reading an entire author's backlist all in one year, and that's okay. In terms of number of books, if we look across the months, I'm not sure how well this is tracking because, again, they're missing entries, but March doesn't surprise me because I read a lot of graphic novels in March. Seeing another spike in September is kind of interesting because I think August and April were the magical readathon months. But you can see, of course, big dips when I was getting burnt out after my spring semester in May and June. And then also, like, there was a big dip in October, but that was because I was traveling a lot. If I had to, I don't know how I would pick best books. Ugh, it's 4 a.m. and I didn't even start recording until like after midnight. So it's just, it's that time of night, guys. I'm an addict. It's fine. All right. Let's give out some awards, superlatives, whatever you call them for 2023. I'm making these up as I go along. Let's start with best graphic novel. We'll say my best graphic novel for 2023 is Snapdragon by Kat Lee. And honestly, one of the only reasons that this ends up being the best, in my opinion, is because it stuck with me like the entire year. I'm still going back and forth and trying to hunt down a copy for my own collection. I want a hardback copy, which I have had a harder time looking for compared to paperback. But yeah, Snapdragon is just a fantastic middle grade graphic novel. It features our young girl named Snap. She has an adorable 3-legged dog. Her town has a witch, and that witch wears Crocs. And so Snap, who has a fascination with roadkill, kind of ends up running with this witch lady. And it's just really, really great. There's some good queer representation too. And it's just a really lovely little story that's got some fantasy, kind of paranormal elements, a little bit of coming of age, and just some fantastic characters. Seriously, this croc wearing grandma is amazing. I love her. I love everyone in this graphic novel. Highly recommend it. Should I pick like a best by age group maybe? Well, I don't really have that many in some age groups, so I'll just pick from a couple different categories. So let's do middle grade. I also am going to cater this towards the types of people I actually want to interact with and have good recommendations for in a library when I work there. So let's do middle grade. Most of the middle grade stuff I read was graphic novels, but I'll still go ahead and say that my recommendation for like the best middle grade that I read of 2023 is Amari and the Night Brothers by B.B. Alston. Still need to read the sequel, Amari and the Great Game, but it's a fantastic little middle grade. I'm going to recommend this to everyone who's looking for something to read before, during, after, or other than Harry Potter. It's got that black girl magic. It's got urban fantasy. It's got a secret organization for teaching young magic users. And we've got our plucky main character, Amari, who just has some really great, complicated family dynamics. And it's just a much better story for modern day kids, I think. So I've talked about it in a previous video. You're free to check it out. I loved it. You'll love it. Your kids will love it. Your friends' kids will love it. Give it a shot. Next, we'll go young adult. I think I'm going to eliminate graphic novels from consideration for these other categories. So, best YA book. I'm gonna go with Legendborn by Tracy Deonn. So I need you all to know that these picks, these superlatives, are of course books that I read in 2023, even if they didn't release in 2023. So forgive me if I picked stuff that makes it seem like it's an obvious choice. Maybe that just says something about my inability to read things right when they come out, or maybe it says something about what publishing was like in 2023. I don't know. Interpret it as you will. I read Legendborn and Bloodmarked in 2023. I loved both of them. I don't think Bloodmark suffered too much from sequel slump. It just was, like if Legendborn was a 5-star, Bloodmarked was like a 4.5 star. And I'm really, really excited for book 3 whenever that comes out. I think next year, 2025. I've got plenty to read in the meantime. So let's jump to adult. Yeah, I don't think I think I'll call adult. This is going to be my biggest section anyway. Let's eliminate novellas from here because I'll give novellas a separate category. There's just so many. My winner for best novel of 2023. Okay, I'll pick a first place, but then I'll also put 2 honorable mentions in here because I'm having a hard time deciding. I think my best read of 2023, man, even trying to narrow it down to just 3 is hard. Okay, so I'm going to award my best read of 2023 to The City We Became by N.K. Jemisin. I felt kind of torn because I know how polarizing this book is for some people, but it really was just such a banger for me, and it really stuck around in my brain for days afterwards. That kind of sticking around where you just have to word dump, word vomit all of your thoughts out to anybody standing within earshot of you. I did that, especially because I finished it right around Thanksgiving. So I had a lot of family members within earshot that got really sick really fast of hearing about this book. So I think I've ruined my chance to be able to recommend books to some of them because I just would not shut up about this book when half of my family don't even read sci-fi or fantasy, let alone know who N.K. Jemisin is. So, yeah, The City We Became, probably my best read of 2023. And then I want to give a special honorable mentions to The Hanged Man by Katie Edwards. It is a sequel, so, don't all run out and buy it at once. And then make sure you read The Last Sun first. And then this one's probably also another slightly polarizing pick, but I'm going to say Light from Uncommon Stars by Erika Aoki. I read that one back in March, so I did talk about it back then, but that one was also a very powerful book. It's hard to say, I would say the books that I want to rank or say that are my best reads aren't always the ones that are the most fun to read. They're not always the things that I learn the most from. They're just books that are very powerful, that have very strong impact on me. So I really appreciate them. Although I will say, The Hanged Man, for all of its dark themes and trigger warnings, has a fantastic sense of humor. So don't let all of the trigger warnings scare you away. If you're able to read those, the humor and the storytelling is so great in the tarot sequence. So yeah, I'm going to say, I think that covers my best of in those categories. Let's also give out a best novella. Again, I did read a surprising number of novellas this year, so that makes me happy. I know a lot of you will probably expect me to say one of Nevo's Singing Hills Cycle novellas is my favorite, or maybe even Malka Older's, since I've been talking about a lot of those lately. But I think my favorite novella read is going to be, and call me mainstream or basic if you want, but This Is How You Lose the Time War by Amal El-Motar and Max Gladstone. The virality and like the way it just surged throughout not just book talk and the book community, but Twitter and a lot of reader spaces and communities as a whole back in May of 2023. It just is one of those like defining moments of the entire year for me. And the fact that I was buddy reading this with a friend made the experience so much better, having that person to chat with right when I was done, especially because it was a quick read. So, unlike a lot of other times where I struggle to read at the same pace as other people, I'm like never in any book clubs for that reason. It's a novella, and we both read it in one weekend and then immediately like got to talk about it, and it was just so special and so fantastic. I also went to a convention one of the weekends in May and saw someone dressed up as Wolfwood from the anime that the Twitter user's name is a reference to, except they had a huge copy of. I'll just post their cosplay here next to me. It was such an excellent cosplay. It was right when everything was exploding on Twitter, so it was fantastic. Even the authors, I think, saw this cosplay, and so the fact that I got to see them in person and they told me their phone had been blowing up like all day was just so cool. So yeah, definitely a defining moment of 2023 for me, and just again, the novella really stuck with me. If you haven't, for some reason, read This Is How You Lose the Time War, if you missed the resurgent hype, because this book didn't even come out in 2023, it just, was a meme, it went viral, do yourself a favor. Even if you don't like sci-fi, do yourself a favor and read this novella. It's so good. What's another superlative I should do? Feel free to drop a comment if you want to know any other best of 2023 ideas. Maybe I can do who's like a new author that I read for the first time in 2023 that I loved? Maybe I'll just say Nevo. Seems like an easy one, isn't it? Okay. I'm going to give it to Nevo, but I should give an honorable mention to someone that's new. Wow, no one else is coming to mind. Oh, T Kingfisher seems like an obvious one too, doesn't it? Malka Older. I'll say Malka Older is the honorable mention, with Nevo being my favorite new to me author of 2023. Malka Older is the author of those cozy sci-fi novellas I was reading, The Mimicking of Known Successes and An Imposition of Unnecessary Obstacles. Yep, I can't think of anything else, and this video is probably already way too long as it is, so feel free to leave a comment if you want to tell me any of your best of 2023s, if you want to know any other superlative type best of 2023 questions you can think of. Let me know, and feel free to tell me about some reading goals you might have for 2024, and if you've already fallen way behind on them like me. But I am also just so busy in January, and if things are not going to look any less busy. They're not looking any less busy in February so far. There's just some really big stuff happening IRL behind the scenes. I'm scheduled to graduate in May, and some other big things are happening. So I hope to give you all an update soon. But until next time, I hope you all read something interesting, and I'll see you soon. Bye bye.